It's important to remember Halo's initial success was not mostly owed to its multiplayer, because online play at the time was still an almost niche activity, exclusive to PCs, and even then only PCs good enough to run the shit, which in 2001 required a fairly high-end rig. It was the era of neckbeards and LAN parties, a simpler time, a more elegant time. The masses of harebrained 10-year-olds talking about your mom, abusing exploits, and screaming into the mic would come later, when Halo 2 made online play a big fucking deal, making Xbox Live the household name that it is and spurring Sony to catch the hell up. In the beginning, the story by itself was enough to have such an impact that it shapes many of us to this day. A big part of who any of us is determined by the environment we inhabit. So it's important to understand the context of Western imperialism so many of us were growing up in at the time Halo was first released. We were number one. We were the most powerful empire in all of human history. We were heroes who had defeated the most evil villains the world could come up with. And we celebrated our military dominance with reckless abandon. I remember my favorite Christmas present before Halo was a giant toy replica of an aircraft carrier, complete with a set of toy replica planes that I would fly around in my fingers, bombing the fucking shit out of vaguely defined enemies. Pilots getting shot down, ejecting, "Tell my wife I love her!" The heroic sacrifice, the good guys always winning in the end, playing out whatever cliches I had picked up from Top Gun or whatever other gymnastic high-octane war movie I was rewatching every day that week. We were the good guys, the strongest guys, and the guys who always won. America. Fuck yeah. But Halo was a game that had you simulate some very different kind of scenarios. I'm older now, so it's easier to maintain a cool detachment from what's going on any screen. But back then, the existential dread of humanity's struggle against the genocidal onslaught of an alien race who they could barely put up a fight against haunted me. Can you imagine what that would be like, I would think to myself, having the whole species wiped out, having the world end, knowing these are end days? The mere simulation of these feelings was so intense, so alarming that it made everything going on in my 8-year-old real world feel trivial. The concept of extraterrestrial invaders was first introduced to us by H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds in 1898. Halo has done a better job than any other fiction to date of capturing the existential horror that Wells originally sought to portray when he first invented the genre. In Wells' view, the superior technology and intellect of the Martian invaders and their subsequent extermination of most of the human race was really not so different from the atrocities Western imperialists had committed against the indigenous populations of the various populations they had colonized. Wells specifically mentioned the Tasmanians, who Britain had conquered and killed the fuck out of, but the analogy is of course apt for any number of the British Empire's ventures into Africa, Southeast Asia, Australia, and the Western Hemisphere generally. It is likewise a fine analogy for Cortez in South America, or of course the United States genocide of Native Americans. In a passage of the book's first chapter, he would write, "Before we judge the Martians too harshly, we must remember what ruthless and utter destruction our own species has wrought, not only upon animals such as the vanished bison and the dodo, but upon its own inferior races. The Tasmanians, in spite of their human likeness, were entirely swept out of existence in a war of extermination waged by European immigrants in the space of 50 years. Are we such apostles of mercy as to complain if the Martians warred in the same spirit?" By depicting Great Britain, the ultimate imperialist power, completely at the mercy of an invading army whose powers it could barely comprehend, much less counter, Wells exposed Western audiences to a feeling they had never known. A century later, Halo accomplished something similar. Such feelings of terror and despair are all too familiar in many other nations' history books around the world, but not ours. Our history books told tales of the plucky underdogs who rebelled against an empire, of the heroes who reluctantly entered world wars that would be finished shortly after, of the shrewd tacticians who outwit yet another menace in the Cold War. At worst, we studied Vietnam, not exactly as a loss, but simply as a venture we decided was no longer worth the effort. Did we learn of the native genocide as well? Of course. But we did not identify with the natives, we identified with the American government and felt remorse over what we had done with our immense, unmatched power, and resolved to use that immense, unmatched power more carefully in the future. Watching a fictionalized mankind at a technological peak 500 years in the future get absolutely pwned, its planets glassed, its ships wiped out, even the in-game combat of Marines getting cut down like paper mache by active camo plasma sword-wielding ultra-elites, introduced the youth of America to a concept that was markedly and deliberately absent from any media we'd consumed until then. The idea that there could be something more powerful than we were. The idea that we could lose. Not only lose, but lose everything. Our world, our way of life, our species. It was fascinating. It was exhilarating. I couldn't put the controller down, and when I did beat the campaign, I binge-read every book because I was afraid of this feeling, but entirely captivated by it. I had to know how it ended. I had to know what the fuck was going on. And what was there in the end? Not a decisive triumph of good over evil, instead all life itself just barely holding on. Not a victory parade with trumpets, but a quiet memorial and a solemn handshake. Humanity owing its survival to the very genocidal maniacs that it had almost been destroyed by. And vice versa. The Human Covenant Alliance had been foreshadowed almost from the beginning, with a significant portion of Halo 1 taking place aboard the Covenant CCS-class battlecruiser Truth and Reconciliation, whose name was a clear reference to the Truth and Reconciliation committees usually set up in the aftermath of civil war or authoritarian regimes to help nations heal through justice and forgiveness. The most notorious of such commissions was set up in South Africa after the cartoonishly racist apartheid system was finally brought down in '95. Some say we need such a commission for black and white here in the States, others say we need it for left versus right. I remember that rush when humans first team up with elites and hunters at the end of Halo 2, just thinking of our enemies like, damn, y'all fucked up now. I think about the vicious civil war that's been waged in this country over the last decade, waged in every way just short of violence. Our battlefields, so many courtrooms, newsrooms, boardrooms, cyberspheres, comment sections. Our parliamentary and legislative systems stressed to their limit, hacking, cheating, stealing, lying, all the clever ways we found to screw one another over, protesting, striking, donating, voting. Each side pushing the other towards mastery of combat through non-violent means. It's the kind of combat that will define the 21st century. I look back on the epic battles we fought, and I pity the fool who should ever have to face us together. The elite's change of heart was of course precipitated by the realization that their cause, the Covenant itself, was fraudulent. It was Halo's boldest and most consequential message. The elites had fought a vicious war for decades. They had killed billions, lost billions more of their own, and dedicated the entirety of their lives to this single purpose, convinced that it would bring them life after death. How can something be untrue when every single person you know believes it too? When a belief system is so completely internalized by a society that even the wisest, fairest, and most talented individuals don't bother questioning it. Can we imagine what it would feel like to have such a belief system obliterated practically in an instant, to look back on everything you had lost, the atrocities you would commit, and realize it was all for nothing more than a fairy tale with no more legitimacy than the monsters under your bed? Of course we can imagine that, because though it was an alien plotline in Halo, any reader of history knows such a phenomenon is all too human in the real world. The elite's experience was not so different from what Nazi Germany went through in the aftermath of World War II, not so different from the Soviets after the Cold War. To a lesser degree, it's the kind of thing experienced by members fleeing religious cults like Scientology. Here in the States, many of us felt a dose of it after Vietnam or Iraq, the Gulf of Tonkin and WMDs being lies so big that it was unfathomable that they were lies at all, until it wasn't. It is that sinking pit in the American stomach when we reflect on how much of our present-day comfort and wealth is not owed to our being heroes, but is owed to the exceptionally profitable genocide and slavery we practiced in our earliest years. That pit in the stomach which would lead even Thomas Jefferson, the slave rapist, to darkly warn that he trembles for his country because God is just and his justice cannot sleep forever. Do such fears also haunt the English and the Spanish and every other colonial empire that waged a centuries-long war against technologically inferior races with different languages, different cultures, different skin colors, only to in the end be faced with the brutal realities of empathy and equality, and to thus have no choice but to confront their own profound sin? And what would God's justice look like? Perhaps a disease that spread throughout all the land, consuming and destroying everything it could. A merciless enemy that could not be reasoned or bargained with. COVID? No. I speak of the Flood. The Flood were Halo's most brutal plot twist. In the span of a single level, the player is made to realize this isn't a game about saving humans from aliens. This is a game about saving life itself from space zombies. Creepy, crawly, squirmy little hive mind spore spawn that impregnate the walls and any host they can find with their slimy green seed. The player's introduction to the Flood was a masterclass in horror and suspense. Marines who had lost their marbles, grainy footage of catastrophe, the dread of seeing Captain Key's face consumed in the belly of some hellspawn zombie potato, and imagining the terror of what he went through, mowing down creatures that are still so reminiscent of the Marines you had come to love and would revert to checkpoints over and over and over again just to save a few levels before, having to turn on your own for the sake of necessity of seeing humans robbed of every last shred of their humanity, living in fear of things that on their surface look so much like you, and knowing that should they catch you, a fate worse than death awaits. These kinds of experiences are a part of every zombie story, and they are what make the zombie genre so fascinating. Indeed, it's clear that man's obsession with the concept of zombies, measured in movies, books, television, whatever other media, is unmatched by our interest in things like vampires, werewolves, mutants, cyborgs, or any other number of threatening creatures in the sci-fi fantasy universe. What is it about zombies that we find so uniquely compelling? Many may be tempted to draw a parallel to man's understandable fixation on real-world diseases, which have played such a significant role in our species' history, like the bubonic plague, the Spanish flu, or COVID. But I think this misses the mark, because there are much worse things than disease out there, and they're much more contagious. A growing body of research has found that things like narcissism, trauma, and loneliness are just as transmissible as any bacteria or virus. That the more time we spend around someone afflicted by these conditions, the more likely we are to develop such conditions ourselves. I believe our collective fascination with zombies is in fact a subconscious reflection of this, because these kinds of mental afflictions align more with our characterization of zombies than traditional physical illnesses do, for a few reasons. First being the active role the infected play in spreading their infection. A chronically lonely person, feeling generally rejected by their peers and fearing the pain of further rejection, will then themselves reject any overtures from friends or family who do reach out. This rejection will in turn hurt said friend or family, causing them to feel lonely and now more likely to repeat the cycle themselves. The narcissist seeks victims to obtain narcissistic supply from. Pity, admiration, obedience. Their victims will internalize the narc's worldview of hierarchy and emotional blackmail as normal, acceptable, even necessary, and in turn seek to replicate it with their own victims. A traumatized person will freak out over small things. Crumbs on the counter, sounds in the distance, unexpected company, unexpected events. So much so that anyone who spends too much time around them will have to learn to freak out over the same trivial shit. At first, only to prevent a meltdown on the part of their traumatized peer, but after long enough, the habits will become so ingrained that they rule you even when you're by yourself. These kinds of contagion spread are much different from the passive nature of how flu or COVID spreads, where no direct action on the part of the infected is necessary. Someone with the flu will typically be aware they are sick and seek to minimize exposure to others, whereas those suffering from the kind of mental illnesses I've described will spread their infection wantonly. Do they know they are spreading the disease any more than a zombie knows it's replicating when it seeks to eat brains? Does it matter? Someone with the flu will retain their humanity. They are still themselves. The lonely, the traumatized, the narcs, just like zombies, these are people who look just like us, who all too often were at one point our close friends and family, but who are in fact dead inside, and who will destroy us all the same if we do not run. Don't you get it? The zombie apocalypse already happened. We've been living in its aftermath for some time. The Flood, The Walking Dead, 28 Days Later, this shit is interesting for the same reason any YouTube tutorial is. The information is relevant. Is there a cure? Maybe, but it's not one the layman on the street can administer. For now, all we can do is survive. Such a cure did exist in Halo. The Halo ring itself was a solution left to us by an ancient civilization that had long ago struggled against the same demons we do. At the root of Halo's lore were the Forerunners, mysterious ancient aliens who had all but disappeared, leaving behind ruins, remnants, clues as to who they were and to what went so terribly wrong. There was always something endlessly fascinating about slowly uncovering the Forerunner secrets. Echoes of a story that took place long ago. You see this same kind of theme play a heavy role in many video game stories like Mass Effect's Reapers or the Vaults in Borderlands. The idea that a civilization clearly more advanced than our own could be wiped out was fascinating much for the same reasons as the idea of an alien invasion. It was humbling, forcing us to re-examine our role in the galaxy and time. Perhaps preying on that hunter-gatherer instinct in all of us that wishes to protect our people, to understand what happened to those before us so that we can prevent for ourselves whatever catastrophe befell them. In real life, we devote considerable amounts of time and energy to understanding the past. We have argued for centuries over what really caused the fall of Rome. So many tomes written, entire professions and fields of research dedicated to that one cause. Still, no single thesis agreed on. Rome fascinates us because Rome scares us. They had it all figured out. They had democracy and republics, ideas that were lost after they fell and would be only reintroduced as revolutionary concepts nearly 1,500 years later. They were masters of math, science, and philosophy. They understood the Earth was round. They knew about other planets in the solar system. They had heating and plumbing, currency and banks. And on the inside, they were just the same as us. A few thousand years is nothing from an evolutionary perspective. They had the same jealousies, lust, ambitions, the same unanswerable questions and existential crises. We have uncovered their graffiti. They joked about people being faggots and fucking each other's moms. They were the most powerful empire in human history. Until, over time, they were no more. And everything they had learned was forgotten, and for more than 1,000 years, during what we call the Dark Ages, mankind regressed. We forgot democracy, we forgot science and math, we forgot plumbing and shit in the streets with the horses. It's been documented that during this time, citizens of their respective feudal nations would stumble on Roman ruins and marvel at their superior building techniques which let stone structures survive in perpetuity, while said citizens' own buildings would rapidly decay within a decade. They would stumble on bathhouses and time diocese and great halls of oratory and debate. They would find scrolls and languages they couldn't comprehend with pictures documenting concepts beyond their imagination. I imagine the feelings of awe, of mystery and wonder, of grim concern they experienced in those times is almost exactly like the feeling we had as children uncovering the Forerunner ruins. the Forerunner technologies and terminals in Halo. Indeed, what I felt uncovering the Forerunner's mysteries is not so different from what I feel reading about the ancient Aztecs, Celtics, the ruins they all left behind. Stonehenge, how did they build it? Why was it aligned with the setting sun? There are ancient ruins even here in North America where we can only guess as to who inhabited them, but we know they had government, great meeting halls, sports, and economies, that they were around for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years, and then they vanished, leaving behind only ancient cities, leaving us to wonder about all the stories that must have taken place there. Love and betrayal, debate and war, families and friends and rivals all lost to time like sand in our fingers, like teardrops in the rain. Halo, a master story that again and again and again simulated feelings and experiences that are all too real, that have all played such a significant role in our species' history and our collective human experience. Like the Forerunners, many a civilization has done its best to leave behind its advice, to pass on what they figured out during their time here on Earth, to pass along the torch to those that follow. And will we listen? In my time on Earth, I've made mistakes and I've suffered, and I trace those mistakes and that suffering back to its roots, and I say, well, I could save everyone a whole lot of trouble if I could just warn them about this, or explain to them why such and such is a bad idea. But it's harder than you think at first, because at the end of the day, you're trying to describe things that are sometimes almost indescribable. Mental processes, feelings, how do you tell someone what the color green is without pointing out an object that is green? Because what if the color you perceive as green is what they perceive as red? So you say, oh, well, green is the color of grass. And they say, oh, okay, but really you're seeing two completely different colors. Because words are crude tools. What if we have this same problem anytime we talk about jealousy, hatred, ambition, confidence? I've learned some lessons. Be yourself. Believe in yourself. Important lessons that I had to learn the hard way and much later than I would have liked, but why? Weren't these pithy little catchphrases pounded into me over and over and over again by every Disney Channel original series and random motivational poster in the locker room? Why didn't it click? Because words are crude tools, and catchy quotes in episodes of Rocket Power can't get across the deeper emotions and mental realizations that have to take place on the inside. I realize now some lessons cannot be taught, but only learned, otherwise man would have solved all its problems long ago. I see everyone making the same mistakes as I do, and didn't they see the same damn posters and watch That's So Raven too? Language can't do the job for you, but I think it can be used to point people in the right direction. Rungs on a ladder they still have to climb, breadcrumbs showing the way back home. So I try to explain things through video games, because games are the special language we all speak, made of feelings, memories, emotions, that sinking pit in your stomach when you realize you're spawn-trapped. You cannot in words make someone understand how shitty being spawn-trapped is if they've never played the game and cared enough about it to feel the pain themselves when they are spawn-trapped, but for those who have, it's an effective language. So I think, well, what if this was thousands of years ago and I was trying to explain lessons I learned to masses of people who were completely illiterate? What would I do then? Well, I guess I would use simplistic universal concepts in my stories that everyone could understand, like snakes, trees, apples, murder. The Bible told us the story of Eve, who eats from the tree of knowledge, a story of how man's cleverness cannot solve the knots of human nature. The internet was supposed to save us. The internet has destroyed us. Our ability to produce capital can provide us tools. It cannot instruct us in the morality of their uses. It cannot make wicked men good. The world will not be saved by some new invention, some clever trick from Musk or Gates, some complex policy from the Harvard grads running the country. Only love and empathy can save America and bring this nation and the world to the promised land that awaits. What are love and empathy? Well, viewer, that is a lesson only you can learn for yourself. And for all our sakes, I suggest you get started.